Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Being in prison gives you a lot of time to think about your own stupidity. However, I didn't think about anything but hate. I was thinking about hating my boss, my future ex-wife Carol, and hating myself for being so damn stupid. My name is Michael Arnold, and when I say that I was stupid, I mean stupidity with a capital G. I was stupid like that ignorant husband who didn't know his wife was cheating on him, and she cheated on him with the man I hated the most in my life, my boss, Jacob Sanders. I was also stupid because I didn't know that this cheater was pregnant with his child. Foolishly, I thought the child was mine. I think my wife's pregnancy is what triggered the conversation. Honey, we need to talk. I suppose I should step back a bit and explain everything. Strangely enough, my current problem started in the first grade. I first got to know and eventually hated Jacob Sanders when we went to first grade together. We've been enemies ever since he made fun of my freckles. It was the first of many fights. It ended in a draw when the teacher separated us. I had a bloody nose and he had a black eye. During the first 8 years of school, Jacob and I fought on average about 3 times a year. With the third grade being the worst, we had 7 fights. However, in the 8th grade, we only had 1 fight for a good reason. I beat the shit out of him. I wanted nothing to do with Jacob and tried to stay away from him, but he wouldn't leave me alone. For some reason, he was jealous of me and constantly tried to surpass me. He tried to get better grades than me in each of our classes. He was better at science and literature. I was better at math and history. In other subjects, we were about the same. Jacob was a good athlete in sports, but I was a little better. However, if I was doing some kind of sport, Jacob was doing the same thing and trying to outdo me. The fighting stopped, as I said, after 8th grade, when Jacob realized he couldn't beat me. Then he started trying to embarrass me or get me in trouble. Because of him, I was almost expelled and arrested while we were at school. It was in my sophomore year when someone broke into the school and painted the hallways. The authorities found my student ID next to an empty canister in a dumpster. The only thing that saved me was that the day before, I noticed my ticket was missing from my wallet and reported it. I knew it had to be Jacob, because one day, coming out of the shower, I saw him walking away from my locker after a workout. I figured he was up to something, so I checked everything in the locker. When I got to the wallet, I checked the cash first and then looked through everything else. And then I noticed that my ticket was missing. I immediately went to the office and reported it. Somehow Jacob had a farting horn. He put the device on the desk where I was sitting and turned it on. The sound of farting echoed through the classroom, and then Jacob started pinching his nose and waving his hand. "Mike, what did you have for lunch?" He chuckled. The class laughed, but I used the good old trick. Whoever confessed he shit himself. The class exploded with more laughter, prompting Miss Wormwood's warning that if Jacob and I continued to disrupt the order in the classroom, we would spend time in isolation. The fact that the teacher laughed at us and then scolded us made Jacob furious. He blushed, but said nothing. Apart from the fact that Jacob was trying to get me expelled and possibly even arrested, his attempts were more annoying than anything else. By and large, I didn't care that he was better than me. Apart from the usual teenage insecurities, I was quite comfortable with who I am. However, there was one area that worried me, and that was girls. We were both pretty cute. However, Jacob's family was wealthy, which gave him an advantage over the girls at school. In the 11th grade, he got his own car, and it wasn't an old clunker. His parents bought him a BMW Z4. The car cost $50,000. How could I compete with her? As it turned out, I was attractive enough to get my share of dates. On the other hand, Jacob dated cheerleaders and girls from the crowd. I reasoned that they weren't in my league anyway, so I didn't care. However, he was not happy with his brilliant success with the girls. He needed to try to rub my nose in his success. If I dated a girl more than once, Jacob would get in and start dating her, and it didn't take long for her to leave me. But even then, for the most part, I didn't care. I wasn't close to any of the girls, so if they wanted to date Jacob, it wasn't a problem for me. However, there was one girl that I really liked. Her name was Sandy Springer, and she was smart, funny, and beautiful. So when I started dating her, I took her to hard-to-reach places so that Jacob wouldn't find out about my interest. After several months of dating, we decided to date together. I thought if Sandy was wearing my ring, then I was safe. Remember, I mentioned that I was stupid. I was stupid even then. The prom was approaching, and I decided that Sandy and I would go together. I should have asked her right away, but I'm not sure it would have done any good. Anyway, after I bought the tickets, I mentioned it to Sandy at lunch. She blushed and said she had accepted an invitation from Jacob to go with him. Then I demanded and got my ring back. Then he left Sandy crying in the cafeteria. I didn't talk to her anymore. I was so mad at Sandy that I wanted to rip someone's head off. Instead, I saw Pam Taylor, the captain of the cheerleading squad and Jacob's supposed girlfriend. Under normal circumstances, I would never have dared to approach her. "Hi, Pam," I said cheerfully. "How are you?" "I'm fine. What about you, Michael?" she replied. Pam was great, and she wasn't arrogant. "I'm fine," I said, deciding that I had nothing to lose. "Tell me, would you like to go to the prom with me?" "That's very kind of you," she replied pleasantly, "but I'm going with Jacob." "Oh," I pretended to be ignorant. I must have misunderstood because I just heard that Jacob asked for Sandy Springer. I must have misunderstood. Yeah, forget what I said, I'm sure I misheard. I left Pam agitated and talking to herself. Later I found out that he and Jacob had a big fight. He may have stolen Sandy from me, but I ruined his romance with Pam. It didn't bring complete satisfaction, but it was better than nothing. But later that day, things got a lot better. "Michael," Pam called out to me as I was leaving school. "Hi, Pam," I continued to feign innocence. "I'm sorry that I upset you then." "Don't be ridiculous, Michael." Pam's eyes narrowed. "I found out that you were dating Sandy, and that bastard Jacob stole your girlfriend. My ears were burning red. I was found out. Yes, I'm sorry. I was just trying to get back at Jacob. I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire. Were you seriously going to take me to the ball?" "Well, little bear," I began to say. "Never mind. Yes, I will be very glad if I can take you to the prom." "Good, because I want payback," Pam said. "And if you play your cards right, this could be a very memorable evening." The prom was a real event for me. Not only did I get the opportunity to invite the most beautiful girl in school to the ball, but she also made me feel like a prince. Pam was all ears. I enjoyed the expressions on the other guys' faces. They couldn't believe she was there with me. And Jacob, I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but it definitely wasn't his girlfriend's date with me. I think Jacob thought that Pam could go to prom as a couple of one of the football players, but certainly not with me. His eyes almost popped out when he saw us enter the hall. Throughout the evening, he tried to get between me and Pam. He was trying to get her to leave me and sit at his table. Pam turned him down. He asked her to dance many times, but Pam didn't give him a chance. I felt very sorry for Sandy because she realized that Jacob was using her. In the end, Sandy burst into tears and asked her parents to pick her up. I still feel a little uneasy, but she made her choice and had to live with him. After the ball, Jacob was still trying to get Pam away from me. I was smart enough to realize that I was playing the role of Cinderella, and by tomorrow Pam would most likely be back with Jacob. But today I was going to play my part to the end, and that led me to a local motel, where I made love to the most beautiful girl in school. When I dropped Pam off, she kissed me hard and told me what a great guy I was. I went home floating on a cloud, but as I expected, by the following Monday, Pam and Jacob were a couple again. However, I grinned at Jacob whenever we passed in the hallway. Graduation came and most of us scattered to our colleges. I was sorry to leave my hometown and scared of the unknown, but I didn't regret breaking up with Jacob forever, or at least that's what I thought. I was accepted to the Georgia Institute of Technology, while Jacob was going to Harvard. Of course, he was going to Harvard. His grandfather had a building there named after him. I studied well at Georgia Tech, specializing in software development, and it was at a party during my freshman year that I met Carol. I won't bore you with the details of how we courted, fell in love, and got married. To tell you the truth, I think we were more like good friends at the beginning than really in love. Needless to say, our story wasn't that memorable, and even now it doesn't matter. About Carol, I will say the following. She was smart. She studied business at the University of Georgia. I liked her because she was not only smart but also funny and very friendly. However, Carol was not super beautiful. She was pretty, like the girl from the next yard. In truth, Carol couldn't compare to Pam, but she was about as beautiful as Sandy. For some reason, we got together. We got married 3 months after graduating from university, and for 5 years of marriage, I considered us quite happy. Although we were more friends than lovers at the time of the wedding. By the 3rd year of our union, I was completely in love with Carol, and I think she was just as in love with me. We even talked about starting a family. I had no idea that my wife had kind of rushed into it and started it without me. Right after graduating from high school, I got a job at Zaba Security Software, a small startup company. I graduated from school at the top of my class, so I had a choice of jobs. Two brothers from Zaba sold me the promise that I would be on the executive floor and earn a fortune. However, don't get me wrong, the company was doing very well. The firm was thriving, and we were doing quality work for some very large companies. I was also paid a tidy six-figure salary. Our job was to find security holes in the company's software and plug them. Our reputation grew, but then the brothers decided to pay off. To my surprise, we were acquired by a company about the same size as Zaba, and that's when my problems started. About 3 years after I started working at Zaba, Carol wanted to find a new job. It so happened that Zaba was looking for an office manager. Carol applied and was hired. I was a little worried that we would both work for the same company, but at first everything went well. We drove around and had lunch together. We worked in completely different departments and fields, so we rarely saw each other during the day. We drove to work together, kissed, and went to our departments. If we were both free, which happened most often, we would have lunch together, and at the end of the day we would go home. Everything was fine until everything went to pieces. Before I tell you about the acquisition, let me tell you about my department. I was a senior programmer, which meant that I worked on projects myself and kept track of the work schedule of the other 8 programmers who reported to me. But my main responsibility was to fix any problems that my team couldn't handle on their own. Fortunately, there were few such problems, which meant that our customers were very satisfied. Our workspace was the size of half a basketball court. We called it bullpen and worked mostly at standing tables. The room was filled with all kinds of computers, servers, interfaces, and printers. We had almost all the computer equipment that could be desired. We prided ourselves on making our customers' systems as secure as possible. In my 5 years at the company, we had only one complaint when a customer's system was hacked. But we traced the hack to one of the company's employees. He disabled most of the software we installed. This employee wasn't very smart, but he gave us a sleepless night. Besides the 9 of us, we had an administrative assistant, Kimberly. She was like our Friday girl. She prepared any correspondence or memos that we needed. She kept track of our supplies and made sure that we never ran out of anything. Kimberly also prepared our monthly reports and kept records of working hours. Strangely enough, most of our work was initially done with pencil and paper. This allowed the programmer to get a general idea before he started typing something into the computer. Somehow, Kimberly managed to decipher everyone's handwriting and print notes for our files. Although it wasn't her job, Kimberly made the best coffee for us every morning. Kimberly was about 23 or 4 years old, I believe. She had short blonde hair, deep hazel eyes, and a very pretty face, but she was about 50 pounds, 22 kilograms overweight. Considering that Kimberly's height was only 165 centimeters, it was a lot of weight for her. Despite the fact that she had a beautiful face, her large belly and backside immediately destroyed the image. I knew Kimberly was sensitive to her weight because she always talked about how fat she was. I felt bad every time she did it, but I understood that it was just her defense mechanism. All I cared about was that Kimberly was damn good at her job and was a valuable asset to my team. The fact that Zaba was acquired came as a surprise. The 2 Zaba brothers didn't even have the courage to personally inform the staff. They asked their lawyer to make this announcement. I was furious because all the stock options that the brothers had promised when they went public disappeared with this announcement. Besides, I didn't know what to do with these changes. Carol was just as upset and puzzled by the news as I was, but she was the one who convinced me not to go out of my way until we saw what the new owners would do. They sent a senior vice president to oversee the transition process. At first, he concentrated on the main office. Zaba has grown from 5 employees when I joined it to more than 150. As I heard, the person from the new corporate headquarters will start working in accounting. Then he was going to walk his way through the whole company. It was only on the 2nd day that I found out that the vice president reviewing Zaba's security software was none other than Jacob Sanders. However, at the same time as I learned that Jacob was heading the transition period, I learned that our salary scale would be adjusted to the scale of the parent company. My salary will be increased by $35,000, and Carol's salary will be increased by $15,000. My internal alarm told me to run, not go to the nearest exit. However, Carol convinced me that we would be foolish to leave our current job, especially after the salary increase. In addition, she noted, Jacob will work there for no more than 6 months, and then he will leave. The first change occurred when 4 new programmers were hired and assigned to Bullpen. Of course, they were all Harvard people. but none of them was a tenth better than anyone on my existing team. They were not only lousy programmers, but also arrogant and with a sense of superiority. All four of them immediately started harassing Kimberly. Sometimes it was harassment, and sometimes it was just plain meanness. I tried to convince them and point out that their behavior was unacceptable. However, they did not stop. Instead, they just harassed Kimberly when they thought I wasn't around. In the end, I called all four of them into the conference room and read them the riot act. They listened to me, but I could see that they were not going to stop. Besides harassing Kimberly, all four of them were a pain in the ass. No one on my team liked them, and they did more harm than good when it came to their work. In the end, I decided that I wanted them to leave. Unfortunately, I didn't have the authority to fire them because Jacob hired them. I knew that if I demanded that he fire them, Jacob would just ignore me. I knew that Kimberly came in early every day to make coffee and prepare the office. Ever since I chastised those four jerks for their attitude towards Kimberly, I've noticed that they've all started coming earlier. Eventually, I realized that they were using the time before my arrival to torment the poor girl. It turned out that Kimberly had come to the point where she was going to quit. I also knew that she liked working at Zaba and needed this job. So I decided to come early and catch them doing it. Hiding in the supply closet next to our small kitchen, I prepared my cell phone. As I expected, Kimberly came in and started making coffee. A few minutes later, the four of them arrived and the torment began. "Hey, Balloon." Ted, the leader, grinned at Kimberly. Fred, another of the four, added, "I want to see your big fat ass." "Yes," said the other two. "We'll even help you take off your clothes." I saw the tears rolling down Kimberly's face, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had more than enough evidence, so I came out of the closet. "The four of you, pack your things and leave. You're finished." "You don't have the authority to fire us," Fred shot back. "Mr. Sanders hired us, and he said that only he could fire us." "It's true," I said with an unpleasant smile on my face. "However, I have evidence that you committed violence against Kimberly, so let me explain what your options are. The four of you can either resign immediately or I'll turn this video over to the police. So the choice is yours. Either you resign or I'll call the police. I'm giving you 15 minutes to make a decision. You can even run to Jacob if you want, but I'm sure he's not going to put his ass in danger to protect you bastards." 15 minutes later, I had all four resignation letters, and all four left. A look of complete relief and gratitude appeared on Kimberly's face. "Kimberly." I called her to my desk when all four of them had left. "I'm sorry for what those four put you through. I should have acted sooner. If something like this happens again, promise me that you will come to me right away. You're a wonderful person, and those four are just assholes." Kimberly let out a little sob and thanked me for protecting her. I told her it was part of my job, but I didn't do a very good job because she had to suffer at the hands of these assholes for too long. "Mr. Arnold, you don't know how much this means to me," she said, fighting back tears. "I was going to quit, but I didn't know what I would do without this job. I didn't know if I could find another equally good job. Once again, Kimberly, I'm really sorry that you had to put up with this garbage. I can see that you're upset. If you want to take a day off, I will make sure that it is not counted against your personal days or sick leave. Thank you, Mr. Arnold, but I'd rather be here at work." After that day, it seemed like Kimberly couldn't do enough for me. I tried to tell her that I was just doing my job, and he kept assuring me that I wasn't doing my job very well because of what she'd been through. Of course, I was called to Jacob's office as soon as he found out that I had forced his programmers to quit. "I want these programmers to be hired again," he demanded as soon as I crossed the threshold of his office. "That's not going to happen," I said decisively. "I have evidence that these four assholes committed violence and abused the administrative assistant of our department. If you want to hire them back, go ahead. But I can guarantee that a lawsuit will be filed against all four of them, the parent company and you. I don't think your bosses will think too highly of this." Jacob looked at me, but then he smiled and gave in. He tried to pretend that he didn't know all the details, but that night I realized he was lying. Carol came home and scolded me for being an asshole to Jacob. She thought I was a jerk for threatening our boss. At that moment, I should have guessed what Jacob was up to because my gut screamed, "Dangerous." But when things got back to normal at home, I shrugged off the incident. After all, I still believed that Carol loved me and only me. If I had listened to my intuition, I probably wouldn't be in jail right now. But I was stupid and let Jacob and my wife lull me into a false sense of well-being. And for 2 months after the merger, nothing changed between Carol and me. I found out that the company that acquired us was called Unity Software. They were about the same size as us, but they worked mainly under government contracts. Zaba gave them the opportunity to enter the commercial market. And no, Jacob's father was not the owner of the company. His family's fortune was made in the manufacture of pipes and wires. However, Jacob's father sold the business when Jacob was still in college. I could say a lot of unpleasant things about Jacob, but I can't say he's incompetent. In fact, he was doing a great job of bringing the two companies together. In fact, he convinced the board of directors to keep the Zaba name because it had a better reputation. I didn't know that Jacob had completed his work on merging the two companies in 8 weeks. After that, he proceeded to seduce my gullible wife. Like Sandy at school, Jacob was able to conquer Carol. Despite my warnings about him, Carol seemed fascinated by this asshole and constantly talked about what a wonderful job he was doing. I kept warning her about Jacob, but she just said I was jealous. In the 4th month, Carol announced that she was pregnant. I was over the moon with happiness. However, our lives began to decline. From 3 times a week, it has been reduced to once every 2 weeks. I attributed it to Carol's pregnancy. Then our lunch break stopped, and finally Carol stopped traveling with me to work. The culmination of all this was the conversation. One morning, Carol stopped me before going to work. I was a little surprised to find that she was still at home, as she had been leaving at least an hour before me lately. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, inviting me to sit on the couch. I sat down as I was asked, not understanding what was so important that we should discuss early in the morning. However, what Carol told me blew up my whole world. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," Carol said, her eyes hard, "but I fell in love with Jacob and he fell in love with me." I stared at her for a long time. After studying her face, I realized that she had no regrets. Finally, I exploded. "Are you completely fucked up? I told you Jacob is an asshole and he's going to try to drive a wedge between us. I can't believe you believe in his complete shit." "He's not an asshole," Carol flared up. "He is a kind and loving person. He understands me, which you could never do." I felt like my soul was being destroyed with every word Carol said. At that moment, I was desperate, so I did what I hoped would bring her to her senses. "But what about our unborn child?" I said softly. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "The baby's not yours," Carol replied with a tight smile. I was stunned by her statement. "That's a lie. No, it's not like that," she said. "We didn't have sex for 2 weeks when I got pregnant." Now I was beside myself with rage. "You're a crooked fool. You made love to that piece of shit." "This is my body, and I can do whatever I want with it," she screamed at me. "I don't belong to you." The devastation can't even describe what I felt. But my father once advised me never to show a woman that she hurt you. Keeping my composure was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I managed to pull myself together and grin at her. "You said Jacob understands you in a way I've never understood," I laughed tightly. "You're right, he understands. He understands that you're a stupid, trusting bitch. God, you're so stupid. But you know what? You deserve each other." "Fuck you, Michael," Carol raged. "No, that's never going to happen again," I said calmly. "But just so you know, I'm not moving out of this house. You can live with Jacob in his apartment." "We'll see about that." Carol turned and headed for the bedroom. What a fucking nightmare I'm in. It was too difficult to find out that my loving wife had been making love to Jacob all this time. Jacob, on the other hand, didn't give me any doubts. I cried all the way to work, but finally pulled myself together. Well, that's an outright lie. I was running out of pure rage. On the way, I decided that I would resign and beat the crap out of Jacob, but not necessarily in that order. And then I bumped into Jacob as he walked through the front door of the company. He didn't seem at all alarmed when he saw me, and even grinned. The thought flashed through my mind that it would be very like Carol to take responsibility and throw her little bomb at me without consulting Jacob. She was very independent. On the other hand, Jacob, I suspected, wasn't going to tell me about the baby before he was born. Then he would have taken both my wife and my newly born child from me at the same time. That would be his final victory over me. Rage filled me as I approached him. He continued to grin. At that moment, I exploded and punched him in the nose and then in the mouth. Blood immediately started pouring into his face, but I didn't finish. I hit him 2 hard punches in the balls, and when he started to fall apart, I hit him with an uppercut. Then I left him crouched in front of the door as the guards rushed to help. I later found out that he had lost 3 teeth, in addition to a broken nose. He also had a ruptured testicle. I wasn't all right either. I broke 2 fingers on my left hand. I went to the bullpen and started packing all my personal belongings and papers into a box. Kimberly saw me, and I saw the worry and fear on her face. What happened? She was genuinely worried. Jacob used my wife behind my back and now she's leaving me for him. I just beat the shit out of him, so I guess I'm fired. And even if they don't fire me, I'll quit. The rest of the staff were shocked by what happened. My team was not only upset for me, but also very worried about their jobs. I assured them that my action would not affect their future work in any way. When the staff was reassured and assured that they would not suffer because of my stupidity, I returned to collecting my things. But before I could finish, the police arrived and arrested me. I expected this to be my destiny, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon. While I was being handcuffed, I asked Kimberly if she could pack up the rest of my things and take them home with her. After I was photographed, fingerprinted, and given paper towels to wipe my fingers, I was allowed to make a phone call. But I didn't know who to call. My parents were on a cruise. Besides, they lived 2,000 miles away in San Diego, and I lived in Nashville. I definitely wasn't going to call Carol. Finally, I decided to call Kimberly. Maybe she can find me a lawyer. However, when I called Zaba, the receptionist told me that Kimberly had left for the whole day. After that, I didn't know what to do, and I just sat in my cell, alternately angry as hell, and thinking how I could get my wife back. One thought was constantly spinning in my head. How could Carol betray me in such a cold and heartless way? Then the thought of revenge overshadowed all others. As the day dragged on and I languished in prison, it became clear to me that Jacob already had a plan. My problems were just beginning. I know Jacob didn't expect the beating he got today. However, I was convinced that Jacob expected me to attack him as soon as I found out about his betrayal. Only he believed that he could do it at a convenient time and place. It looks like I ruined that part of his plan. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I appeared before the judge for arraignment. I was assigned a public defender because I didn't have a lawyer. To my horror, he looked like a teenager with a bad complexion. Not only did my lawyer look like a child, but he didn't seem to know anything about me or my case. He was quickly trying to read the dossier when the judge began to get annoyed with him. "Lawyer," the judge barked, "it's very simple. Does your client plead guilty or not guilty?" The guy looked at me like a deer at the headlights. Then I jumped up and said firmly, "Not guilty." "Thank God," the judge sighed. "Bail is set at $2,500, in cash or by check." I didn't have nearly enough cash with me, and I didn't carry any blank checks with me. So I looked up at the judge. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but I don't have that much cash, and I don't carry blank checks with me. Is there any way I can contact the guarantor?" "My secretary will help you with this, and she will let you know when the court date is set," he said. But before he could name the next case, I heard a voice behind me. "I'll bail him out." Turning around, I saw Kimberly waving a checkbook. I was stunned to see her in the courtroom and very touched that she showed enough care to come and help me. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can get to the ATM, I assured Kimberly. "I'm not worried about that," she said softly, looking at my swollen hand. "Does it hurt much? In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't even compare to the pain of Carol's betrayal." "If it comes down to it, boss," Kimberly said, looking into my eyes, "I think your wife is a very stupid fool. She made a huge mistake by trading you for Jacob." I smiled at my administrative assistant. "Thank you, that's very nice of you." At that moment, the young man took a step towards me. "Are you Michael Arnold?" When I said yes, he handed me an envelope and said, "You have been served." I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but the speed with which the papers were handed to me left no doubt that Jacob and Carol had been planning this for some time. It was another cut in my heart. "Let's go get something to eat after I withdraw some money from the ATM, I said dejectedly. However, when I tried to log into my account, I was refused. I called the bank and was told that all my accounts were frozen. It will remain in effect until the court cancels it. Yes, now I know that it is possible to file a petition to the court for exemption from the complete asset freeze, but I didn't know that at the time. I also found out that my other savings account was frozen and my credit cards were canceled. A quick check of my wallet showed that I had $126 plus a $100 bill tucked into one of the folds. "Apparently Carol and Jacob have frozen all my money," I told Kimberly. "I don't know exactly what to do, but at least I can buy you dinner." "No, you won't," Kimberly protested. "You will come to my apartment and I will cook dinner for us." I had to admit that I liked Kimberly's suggestion. It didn't make sense for me to spend the little money I had on lunches. We stopped at Zaba, picked up my car, and I followed Kimberly to her apartment. I couldn't believe how useful this woman was to me. After all, she was just a work colleague. I was going to pay her back every cent and more as soon as I sorted out my finances. At dinner, I felt really sick. Moreover, 2 of my fingers hurt like hell. I put ice on them as soon as I arrived at Kimberly's, but they still hurt. After watching me writhe in pain, Kimberly finally took out a package of Percocet, which she bought for root canal treatment. I took 1 pill, and after half an hour, the pain subsided significantly. However, I wasn't good company. They really did a number on me, I complained. I am completely ruined, taped and tattooed. Right now, I can't even think about taking revenge on Jacob or Carol, because it's going to come back to me like a boomerang. But someday I'll pay these 2 bastards back in full. Mr. Arnold, Kimberly said softly. Please call me Michael, I insisted. I'm not your boss anymore. Besides, what you did for me today makes you a very good friend. Kimberly smiled and continued. Michael, my mother cheated on my father and left him for another man. I had to live with her, and I hated every minute of it. Her lover was just as much an asshole as Jacob. He never married my mother, but they lived together for 10 years until he found someone younger to run away. My father was embittered and tried to take revenge on my mother for many years. He ended up in prison several times and eventually died a broken man. Don't waste your life trying to get revenge. In the end, my father told me that he really regretted letting my mother's betrayal ruin him. Today, my mother lives alone in a nursing home, where she has breathing problems due to years of smoking. I visit her once a week, although I still don't like her very much. And every week I have to listen to her wail about the mistake she made in leaving my father. So please don't waste your life trying to get revenge. I told her she was probably right. However, at that moment, I wasn't going to let those sneaky bastards off the hook. Anger was still bubbling under the surface, and I wanted my pound of flesh. After I helped clear the dishes, I told Kimberly that it was time for me to go and look for a cheap motel. Her reaction was immediate. No, you won't do that. You're going to spend the night here. I have a spare bedroom, and you'll be glad to have it. Kimberly, you were the only ray of sunshine in the pit that became my life. I can't impose on you anymore. First of all, it's not an imposition, she insisted. Secondly, if you sleep here, I can go to work tomorrow and find out what's going on. Again, Kimberly made a lot more sense than I did, so I accepted her invitation. Around mid-morning the next day, Kimberly called me to tell me that I had indeed been fired. Then she told me to turn on her computer and type an email instructing the HR department to send my last check to her address. Shirley, the head of human resources, wasn't sure if the company was obligated to pay for my vacation and sick leave, but she thought that it should still be indicated in the letter. But after all, the courts have frozen all my money, I pointed out. Shirley told me that the court order only applies to bank accounts, so write the letter as soon as possible before Jacob or Carol figure out what you're doing. After doing as Kimberly advised, I received a fax saying that in a couple of days, I would receive a check for $4,925.57. The fax also said that they should check the state law to determine whether the company should pay vacation or sick leave. As it turned out, no. Nevertheless, getting almost $5,000 was a great success. When Kimberly got home, she told me that Jacob wasn't there that day, but Carol was, and she's mad at me for messing up the relationship with her boyfriend. For some reason, this amused both Kimberly and me. I decided to stay at Kimberly's until I get my check. During this time, I compiled a resume and began actively looking for a job. Very quickly, I discovered that Jacob and Carol had blacklisted me. Since I worked in the field of cybersecurity, no one would take risks if I had a criminal record. When the check arrived, I handed it to Kimberly and she deposited it in her account. I didn't want to risk opening a new account and have it frozen too. When I told Kimberly again that I wanted to get rid of her worries and rent my own apartment, she was upset. Kimberly pointed out that without a checking account, I probably wouldn't even be able to rent a doghouse. Besides, if my credit rating were checked now, it would most likely show my financial difficulties. Listen, please stay here until you find a new job, she urged me. In the meantime, you can find a lawyer. In the end, I agreed. The lawyer I hired took over for me when I paid him an advance payment of $2,000. However, it was money well spent because he immediately petitioned the court to allow me access to a reasonable amount of money from our checking and savings accounts. The court allowed me to spend an amount sufficient to ensure a minimum lifestyle. This, of course, included paying for my lawyer's services. I had been living in Kimberly's apartment for 8 days now and decided it was time to leave. Therefore, I found an apartment in her complex and made the necessary deposit for it. That Saturday, Kimberly helped me buy minimal furniture for my new apartment. At the same time, I invited her to lunch, which I promised her. Kimberly wanted to go to the Olive Garden, which I also love. During dinner, I studied her carefully. She had an angelic face, but the extra 50 pounds she was wearing detracted from that beauty, and I could tell that Kimberly was very self-conscious about her weight. Then I had an idea that I hoped she wouldn't find offensive. I turned it over in my head, deciding how best to present this sentence. I just found out that our complex has a gym, I said casually. I want to use it, but I would really like to have someone to walk with. Are you interested in this? Do you really want to be seen with me? What is it? She asked, moving her arms up and down her sides, indicating her excess weight. Yes, I do, I replied readily, unless you'd rather not be seen with a potential criminal. My comment got exactly the reaction I wanted. Kimberly really didn't want to go to the gym because she didn't want anyone to see her body. However, Kimberly didn't want to offend me at all, so she agreed. We made a schedule that we went to 4 times a week at 6 in the morning because there was never anyone there. After the first week, Kimberly realized that she didn't have to worry about being embarrassed and started enjoying the sessions. I kept looking for a job, but none of the security software specialists showed any interest in me. At least, no decision has been made on my case yet. In a conversation with my lawyer, I found out that there is a high probability that I will be found guilty of assault. However, he was careful. He never told me what to say or lie. However, he told me that if I fell into a blind rage because of the infidelity of my boss and wife, then this could be a mitigating circumstance. And if I can't remember what really happened, the court, of course, will have to take that into account. On the day of the trial, Kimberly took time off from work and came with me. I really appreciated such support. When my lawyer found out that Judge Parker would be the presiding judge, he convinced me to apply for a closed court hearing. In this case, the decision is made by the judge, not the jury. My lawyer explained that it would make the judge happy, and besides, Judge Parker hates scammers. The prosecutor presented 3 witnesses to the alleged attack. They told about what they had seen and heard. My lawyer cross-examined them, forcing them to admit that they did not see the start of the fight and did not hear me threaten Jacob. They could not even categorically state that Mr. Sanders did not strike the first blow. Then Jacob was called to the podium, where he told his story. Naturally, Jacob spoke in detail about what was called an unprovoked attack. Jacob categorically claimed that he had not struck a single blow, and then listed the injuries he had sustained. My lawyer asked him a question about his relationship with my wife. Jacob lied and said they were just friends. When asked about the child my wife was carrying, he told the judge that, as far as he knew, he was mine. When Jacob came off the podium, he grinned at me as he returned to his seat. I was the only witness that the lawyer called for my defense, and all he did was ask me to describe what happened on the day that led to the alleged attack, and what I remember about that incident. I told how in the morning my wife took me by surprise, saying that she was divorcing me in order to marry my boss. I was particularly shocked when my wife told me that the child I thought was mine actually belonged to Jacob. I explained that she was the love of my life, but she threw me away like a pair of old shoes. Then I told the judge that I remember seeing Jacob at the door and how he was grinning at me. After that, I lied and said I didn't remember anything until I was at my desk and started throwing things into a box. The prosecutor tried to confuse me in my memories. He kept trying to revise the chronology of events. The truth was, I was so furious that morning that I had no idea what time it was. And the more he questioned me and tried to get me to specify a specific time and action, the more obvious it became that I didn't remember anything. Then he asked me if I really thought the court would believe that I didn't remember anything about the attack. I told him that I had a headache on the way to work and saw flashes of light, which was actually true. I repeated that all I remember is Jacob grinning at me. Then he asked me if I knew for sure that the baby my wife was carrying belonged to Jacob. I replied that all I could tell him was what my wife had said. Carol was not in court because no one bothered to subpoena her. My lawyer told me that in his opinion, my wife would be a wild card that he would not want to touch. I believe the prosecutor felt the same way. After my speech, the judge retired to his chambers to consider the verdict, but returned 10 minutes later. "It is clear to me," Judge Parker said, "that Mr. Arnold was betrayed in the most cowardly and shameful manner. I believe that this blow to his nervous system led to serious mental disorders. I believe that Mr. Arnold was temporarily insane, and therefore I find him innocent." "This is outrageous," Jacob growled from his seat, as a result of which Judge Parker hit the hammer hard, threatening to hold Jacob accountable for contempt of court. The sight of Jacob with his face red with anger pleased me. Jacob's victory over me just took a little hit. However, I wanted to get back at him so badly. However, having just escaped imprisonment, I had to put aside any thoughts of revenge for the foreseeable future. Besides, I had no idea how to hit them back. Outside the courtroom, Jacob was waiting for me. It occurred to me to try to encourage him to attack me, but I wasn't sure how it would turn out, so I just called the bailiff. "I shouldn't be closer than 150 meters from this man, but he prevents me from leaving." The bailiff looked at Jacob and told him to move on. Jacob shouted over his shoulder, "It's not over yet. I'm going to sue you." It bothered me, so I asked my lawyer, "Can he sue me?" "Anyone can sue anyone else," he smiled. "But his case is weak. But if you really want to tear the ground out from under his feet, do not admit anything other than offering to pay for his medical expenses, which were not covered by insurance." That's what I did in a letter addressed to his office. Jacob did not respond and did not file a lawsuit. The night after the trial, it had been a little over 9 weeks since Carol dropped that bomb on me. Although I was still seething with hatred, the victory in court lifted my mood a little, and I decided to invite Kimberly to dinner. I also had some interesting news that I wanted to share with her. Now let me reassure all readers who think that my story will follow the usual scenario. I've read many similar stories about husbands who were betrayed, just like me. In these stories, it seems that all the affected husbands are starting their own businesses. Then the husband who was cheated on becomes fabulously rich, and his ex-wife realizes that she made a huge mistake by leaving him. This will never happen to me. I'm just a worker bee. A good worker bee, but just a worker bee. Kimberly and I agreed to meet at a small Italian restaurant. That evening, she had to work a little later because everything was not in order in my former department. Nothing serious. They were just getting used to my absence. Anyway, when she came in, she looked great. Kimberly was still overweight, but it was obvious that she had lost weight, and the dress she was wearing was very flattering. I got up and kissed her on the cheek. "Wow, you look great. You've lost weight, haven't you?" Kimberly beamed. "Yes, I lost 7 kilograms. I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier, but you're wearing these oversized hoodies and sweatpants. Anyway, like I said, you look great." The restaurant was small and cozy. It was exactly the place that couples choose for a date. But I didn't think of it as a date. It was just a meeting between 2 close friends. "I asked you to have dinner with me tonight because I wanted to celebrate my victory in court, and I have some news. I found a job." "That's great," Kimberly said. "Who are you going to work for?" "Sable Security from Jacksonville, Florida," I replied. "I didn't know they had an office here," Kimberly said worriedly. "No, I'll have to move to Jacksonville." And I was completely surprised when the light went out in Kimberly's eyes and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Actually, I thought you'd be happy for me," I said. "I'm glad you got a job," Kimberly said as the tears continued to flow. "But you're going to be 600 miles away from me." "Kimberly, do you remember when you told me not to let my wife's betrayal consume me with hatred?" She nodded. "Now I realize that the only way to do this is to put some distance between Carol and me and let time do the rest." "I understand," Kimberly said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just going to miss you. I really enjoyed having a friend." "Hey, I'm just a phone call away," I said, trying unsuccessfully to cheer her up. I was really surprised by Kimberly's reaction. Then it dawned on me that she probably didn't have many friends, so I made another suggestion. "You could come visit me if you want. I don't know what Jacksonville has to offer, but I'll find out." "Do you really want me to come visit?" "What is it?" she asked. "Of course," I replied quickly. "Remember, I won't have any friends there either." "When are you leaving?" Kimberly finally asked. "I'm leaving in 45 days, but before that time I have a lot to do. I need to find a place to live, open a new bank account. I also need to take a lie detector test, be fingerprinted, and take a test for banned substances. I think it will take at least 2 trips there to do all this." After that, my mood improved somewhat, but I noticed that Kimberly didn't eat much. I figured she was still a little upset. In fact, the closer the time came when I had to leave, the sadder Kimberly became every day. She seemed to be hoping for something more between us. I must admit, this confused me because I felt that Kimberly could do much better than me. I spent my last evening at Kimberly's apartment before starting my new job. She cooked a delicious dinner, which was complimented by a chocolate cake with the inscription, "I will miss you." After I helped her clean up, we watched TV until it was time to go to bed. I kissed her on the lips before heading to the guest room. During the night, I felt the bed move slightly and someone's body slipped next to me. While still half asleep, I realized that it was Kimberly, and she was naked. I froze for a second as she reached down between my legs. As quickly as I could, I pulled off my underpants and lifted my t-shirt over my head. When I turned to face Kimberly, she pressed against my body, and I felt her silky, smooth skin. Her soft breasts pressed against my chest, and it was all wonderful. I kissed her on the lips, and she responded with desperate passion. I thought about it for about half a second, and then I was between her spread legs. But when I started going in and out, she was moaning louder and louder. I had a fear that maybe I had hurt her, or she was angry that I had taken advantage of her, or something like that. "What's wrong, Kimberly?" I asked, almost in a panic. "Have I offended you?" "No, I'm just so happy," Kimberly said, resting her head on my chest. We lay there for several long minutes before Kimberly slid off my bed. She took 2 steps towards the door and then came back to me. She leaned over and kissed me. "Are you going to sleep in my bed with me tonight?" I gladly agreed, if only because my bed was soaking wet. Besides, sleeping with Kimberly seemed like a great way to spend my last night in this city. When he was fully erect, she sat on top of me and rode. I have never seen a more pure pleasure and tenderness on a person's face than on Kimberly's face that morning. After that, we took a shower together, and it was there that I realized that Kimberly had gone about 3/4 of the way to becoming a cold-blooded fox. She was already way out of my league, but I will cherish this night for the rest of my days. After breakfast, I checked my car one last time to make sure I had everything. Then I turned to Kimberly and kissed her. She responded with perhaps the most passionate kiss I've ever received. Then, unfortunately, it was time for me to leave. When my car pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Kimberly sitting on the curb. She buried her head in her hands and sobbed. I desperately didn't want to leave her, but I knew it was for the best. I still loved Carol, and that's why I was a spoiled commodity. But it was kind of funny because I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. It's just that deep down, I had a deep sadness. Jacksonville was an interesting city, but I didn't get to see much of it. I threw myself into my new job. I worked long hours, but not only to catch up, but because it helped me forget about Carol. I kept in touch with Kimberly, and she always seemed so happy when she heard from me, and so sad when our phone conversation ended. It was from her that I heard the news I was so afraid of. Carol and Jacob got married about a month after the final divorce. I also found out that Carol had a baby girl. For some reason, this news didn't excite me that much. Perhaps I was beginning to overcome resentment and humiliation. However, I didn't have sleepless nights anymore. I also rarely woke up in the morning depressed that Carol wasn't in bed with me. Kimberly arrived in March and spent 4 days with me. Since we hadn't seen each other for a while, we weren't sure about our relationship. It was almost as intense as that first time. Only this time I had rubber bands on hand. Maybe 4 dozen is too optimistic, but in those 2 nights I used 6 of them. About a year after that, I was told that I could hire an administrative assistant for my team. Sable's security was significantly bigger than my previous company. If Zaba had 1 team dealing with cybersecurity issues, then we had 6 of them. Since it was up to me to decide who to hire, I immediately called Kimberly. I barely had time to explain the essence of the job to her, as she said she wanted to get it. When I met Kimberly at the airport, my breath caught in my throat. As I expected, she was great. When she got out of the passenger compartment, I saw how the men looked up, but all she wanted was to get to me. She rushed into my arms and kissed me with such passion that my knees buckled. According to the plan, Kimberly was supposed to stay with me until she found her own apartment. I thought it would only take a week, but the search dragged on for weeks. There was something wrong in every apartment she looked at. I didn't complain because Kimberly and I slept in the same bed. It's funny that in the year and a half that I lived in Jacksonville, I thought less and less about Carol. And when Kimberly showed up, I stopped thinking about her at all. Nevertheless, I knew that Kimberly would eventually move, and I was dreading this day. 5 weeks later, I asked Kimberly about her apartment situation, and she started crying. I was completely taken aback. I knew I had made her cry, but I didn't understand why. "I'm sorry. I apologized. Did I say something wrong?" "Do you want me to leave?" Kimberly asked timidly. "Hell no. I said decisively. I would like you to stay forever, but I understand that one day you will want to leave. I need time to prepare. I would ask you to marry me, but you are too good for me. No, that's not true, Kimberly protested. I've loved you almost since the day I started working at Zaba. I would have married you in an instant. It changed everything for us. That same day, we went to the ring store and started planning our wedding. Although I was afraid that Kimberly would eventually leave me for someone else, I was so in love with her that I had to take the risk. 6 months later, Kimberly and I got married. A year after that, Kimberly gave birth to a little boy, whom we named Mikey Jr. 18 months after that, we had a baby girl named Charlotte. I have risen to Sable, to the level of head of all 8 cybersecurity groups. Yes, we have added 2 more. Kimberly, on the other hand, chose to stay at home. Closer to Christmas, 3 years later, I was called to a meeting. At this meeting, I learned that Sable is planning to acquire Zaba security software. I was to be part of a group that was to conduct a legal review before the acquisition was completed. During the years that Kimberly and I were married, Kimberly's mother died and my parents retired. They moved to Jacksonville to be closer to their grandchildren and to me. Having taken them on as babysitters, I planned to use the week-long trip as a mini vacation. I also wanted to use Kimberly's skills as an administrative assistant to help me conduct an investigation. That way, I could take Kimberly to work with me every day, where she could see some of the people she worked with, and we could sneak out for long lunches together. During the week I spent in Nashville, I learned 4 things. First, I found out that this facility was the only place where Zaba dealt with cybersecurity. Secondly, Jacob was appointed Chief Operating Officer, and Carol was appointed Senior Project Manager. Thirdly, despite my dislike of Jacob, I found that he runs the company perfectly. From my point of view, all his activities were first class, and the last thing I found out was that Zaba was having her Christmas party on Friday night, and I had to go to it. With the exception of the first introductions of our team to Jacob, I had no contact with him. Also, throughout the week, I never saw Carol. However, everything changed at the Christmas party. Zaba has rented a ballroom at the Hilton Doubletree Hotel in downtown Nashville. It was festively decorated, tables stood along the dance floor, and a group of 5 people was located in one corner. They quietly played Christmas carols, soft background music, and from time to time played old songs. After dinner and speeches, there was to be dancing. Also, to everyone's delight, a bar was opened, and he attracted more and more attention as more and more people arrived. Jacob, Carol, and some senior Zaba employees did not fail to greet the Sable team. I wasn't looking forward to it. I didn't know how I would react to having to face Jacob and Carol. However, my fears were in vain. Jacob, as I already knew, looked about the same, and Carol, although she looked a little older, still looked good. Strangely, I didn't feel anything when they came to greet us. "Mike, I'm glad you could join us tonight," Jacob said nervously. "I hope our past disagreements will not interfere with the acquisition." "Not from me," I assured him. "This is ancient history. And who is this beauty?" Jacob smiled broadly, taking Kimberly's hand. "This is my beloved wife, Kimberly," I said, kissing her on the cheek. Jacob's smile faded as he looked at Kimberly and then at me. Kimberly grinned at Jacob. "Don't you remember me, Jacob? I was Michael's administrative assistant when he worked at Zaba, but I changed my job and became Michael's wife. It was a huge boost for me." Jacob's eyes narrowed even more, but he tried to smile again. However, she didn't seem sincere. "Of course, it's been so long. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you." Jacob moved on, but his gaze continued to wander over Kimberly and me. Then Carol moved closer to me. "Michael, you look very good," she said, taking my hand. "And your wife is great. I didn't know you were married." "We'll be married for 7 years in March," Kimberly said with a smile, hugging my hand. "Both you and Jacob look good," I replied, and then asked, "How is your daughter?" Carol winced at first, but then she smiled. "She's doing great. Tammy is in the 2nd grade, and her brother, Jacob Jr., is in kindergarten. Do you have children?" "2, Kimberly replied. "Mickey Jr. goes to kindergarten, and Charlotte is still at home with me. They're both doing well. Thanks for asking." After that, Carol moved on, and shortly after that, Kimberly and I left to find our table. The food was excellent, and the speeches, fortunately, were short. The CEO of Sable simply assured everyone that no one's job was in jeopardy, at least for the next year, and that he was looking forward to the merger. When dinner was over, the music started, and Kimberly and I took a few laps around the stage. I think today's young people have missed the moment when it comes to dancing. Slow dancing with a loved one is such an intimate thing. One evening, I felt a tap on my shoulder. When I turned around, I saw Carol standing there. Kimberly turned to see who I was looking at, and her eyes narrowed when she realized it was my ex-wife. Carol smiled sweetly at Kimberly. "May I ask your husband to dance?" Kimberly looked at me and then smiled at Carol. "Only if you don't forget where to return it." I took Carol out onto the dance floor and we danced in silence for about a minute. "Michael, I just want to apologize to you for what Jacob and I did to you back then," she said with genuine remorse in her voice. "You didn't deserve any of this. But when I found out that I was pregnant with Jacob's child, I realized that everything was over between us. That's why I decided to make our breakup quick and easy. I didn't even think about how much it would hurt you. I shouldn't have let Jacob talk me into the scorched earth policy we used. It was completely inappropriate." I laughed a little. "As people say, it's either water under the bridge or water over the dam. Right now it doesn't matter. We've all moved on. Besides, I kinda got some of that. I beat the shit out of Jacob. Apparently I didn't hurt his testicles too much because you had a second child." Carol giggled at that. We danced in silence for a while, and I decided to bury the hatchet between us once and for all. "Listen, Carol," I began hesitantly. "I admit I was very sad when you left me for Jacob. It took me many months to come to terms with your loss, but now we are both happily married and have children. I believed that this was how it was supposed to happen." Carol burst into a sharp laugh, and when I looked at her face, a tear was running down her cheek. Did I say something wrong? Carol just shook her head. "No, Michael, you didn't say anything bad. It's just not the way you think it is. At first glance, everyone thinks we're the perfect couple, and in the first year, I would have agreed with them. But Jacob is just a charming manipulator. He uses people and then discards them. I know he cheated on me many times, but he's not as smart as he thinks he is. Every time I find out that he cheated on me, I cheat on him." My mouth opened and Carol noticed it. She giggled. "It's a hell of a way to live, I know," she said sadly. "I should have left Jacob when I found out what he really was like, but I was too ashamed and too proud. Michael, I'm glad you found happiness, but I'll always regret leaving you. You and my children are the best thing that has ever happened to me." We kept talking until the song ended. Carol then escorted me back to my table and thanked Kimberly for letting her borrow me. When Kimberly and I danced our last dance that evening, it dawned on me that her advice a few years ago turned out to be correct. If I refused to move on from Carol, she could very well have ruined me. It's probably true that when God closes one door, he opens another. When I lost Carol, I was completely devastated, but then God let me find Kimberly, and I can't even imagine life without her. "So, what did you and Carol talk about?" Kimberly finally asked. "Is she trying to get you back?" I laughed and kissed her, as if she has any chance of doing that. "Okay," Kimberly said, resting her head on my shoulder. "Just remember that I'm a jealous woman. I'll rip off your you-know-what if you ever try to leave me." And she only brought it up because she had heard that everything in their marriage was not so rosy and sunny. "Carol told me the same thing," I agreed. "But I think they'll stay together for the sake of the kids. After the children grow up, I would not bet that this marriage will last. What a sad way to live your life." Anyway, Carol told me something that I thought was funny. I know she wasn't amused at all, and I'm sure Jacob won't find it funny when they get home tonight. "And what is it?" Carol was standing behind her husband, and he didn't know she was there. "Jacob stared at you when he said, 'That damn Michael, he's won again.'